The room was all glass and polished steel, designed to reflect power from every angle. Daniel Mercer stood at the far end of the boardroom table, remote in hand, the final slide of his restructuring proposal glowing behind him. Cost containment, supplier stabilization, long-term resilience. He had rehearsed it between packing school lunches and signing permission slips. Victoria Holly didn't look at the screen. She looked at him. "This plan," she said evenly, "is cautious to the point of paralysis." A few executives shifted in their seats. Daniel kept his posture straight. "We're not in the business of playing small," she continued. "We're here to dominate markets, not protect feelings." The implication hung in the air. Emotionally distracted, risk-averse, soft. Daniel responded calmly, explaining volatility forecasts, long-term exposure, preventable losses. He spoke in numbers, not pride. Victoria cut him off with a raised hand. "We've decided to move in a more aggressive direction," she said. "Effective immediately. Your position is being eliminated." Silence. No one met his eyes. Public claim. Surgical. Daniel nodded once. "Thank you for the opportunity." No argument. No visible anger. Just a quiet click of his laptop closing. As executives filed out, Victoria approached him near the door. Her voice dropped, professional but edged with something sharper. "You've peaked, Daniel," she said. "This is as far as you go." He held her gaze for a second. Not defiant, not defeated, just steady. "I appreciate your honesty." In his no-vacant office, he packed slowly. A framed photo of Lily at the beach. A chipped ceramic mug that read, "World's okayest dad." His inbox flickered with automated access revocations. One unread email caught his eye before the system locked him out. "Decommissioned facility auction final notice." He stared at the subject line a moment longer than necessary, then shut the screen. Downstairs he handed over his badge. Security avoided conversation. By 3:30, he was standing outside an elementary school painted in bright fading colors. Children poured out in chaotic laughter. Lily spotted him and ran forward, backpack bouncing. "You're early," she said, breathless. "Got out of work ahead of schedule," he replied, kneeling to hug her. She studied his face with unsettling precision. "Good egg, the kind you learn from," he said lightly. She slipped her hand into his as they walked toward the car, talking about a math quiz and a class pet hamster named Rocket. Daniel listened, nodding, smiling at the right moments. Behind that steady expression, the ground had shifted, but Lily didn't need to feel it. Not yet. Daniel's mornings began before the sun. The house was small, narrow, and quiet in a way that only single-parent homes could be. He moved through it without turning on unnecessary lights, measuring coffee grounds carefully, stretching eggs into tomorrow. By 6:30, Lily's lunch was packed apple slices dipped in lemon so they wouldn't brown. A handwritten note folded into the napkin. Today's read, "You're braver than you think." He woke her gently. No rush in his voice. No waiting. Adita at the kitchen table. She talked about an upcoming science presentation while he nodded, tying her hair back with steady hands. The skyscraper boardroom from yesterday felt like another planet. There, decisions were made in millions. Here the victory was getting a child to finish her oatmeal after school. She worked on a model bridge made of popsicle sticks. When the structure collapsed under its own imbalance, she tried not to cry. He helped her rebuild it, showing her where tension needed support. "Strong doesn't mean heavy," he said quietly. "It means balanced." That night, after she fell asleep, he reinforced the base with discreet precision. Not enough to take credit, just enough to make sure it held. 3 years earlier, the house had been louder, softer too. Lily's mother had filled rooms with an ease Daniel never quite mastered. Cancer had stripped the air from their lives in less than 18 months. Since then, stability became sacred. Routine was oxygen. Pride had no practical value. Later, alone at the kitchen table, Daniel spread out printed listings of industrial liquidations, warehouses, equipment, lots, failed distribution centers. Most were marked high risk, distressed, or structurally obsolete. One listing appeared again and again. Ridgeway manufacturing facility, decommissioned, environmental remediation required, outdated lines, poor geographic positioning, estimated, loss projection severe. He studied the satellite image. Rail access, dual highway adjacency, dock depth capacity. The commentary dismissed it as a sinkhole. Daniel leaned back, thinking, years ago, during a supply chain crisis, he had quietly distribution through underutilized regional nodes. No one else bothered analyzing. The company saved millions. Victoria received the praise. Daniel received a brief thank you email. He didn't resent it. Systems worked that way. From the hallway, Lily's voice drifted out, half asleep. "Dad." He folded the papers quickly. "I'm here." She padded into the kitchen, hair tangled. "Are we moving again?" The question landed heavier than the boardroom verdict. "No," he said without hesitation. She searched his face for cracks. "Promise, I promise." After she returned to bed, He opened the drawer near the sink and slid the unpaid mortgage notice beneath a stack of manuals. Due date approaching. Grace period narrowing. Financial uncertainty pressed in quietly, like winter against thin glass. But he refused to let it touch her. He returned to the listing. Why this plant? Even he couldn't fully articulate it yet. It wasn't optimism. It wasn't desperation. It was recognition. Infrastructure others considered obsolete. Margins too small for corporate appetite. Potential buried under neglect. He printed the auction details. Saturday, 10 a.m. the next morning. Lily handed him her repaired bridge, proud and glowing. It held steady under her textbook's weight, she said. Balanced, he smiled. Looks that way. That weekend, he told her he had errands to run. Nothing important, just curiosity really. But as he drove toward the industrial outskirts of the city, passing empty lots and faded signage, curiosity felt a lot like decision. The auction was held in a folding chair conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet. A projector hummed against a stained wall, cycling through images of Ridgway manufacturing facility like a cautionary slideshow. Cracked concrete, rusted conveyor lines, peeling hazard tape. The crowd was thin, a few seasoned investors, 2 scrap brokers, 1 environmental consultant already shaking his head. Remediation costs alone will bury whoever touches this. Someone muttered. Wrong side of the rail split. Another added. Logistics nightmare. Daniel sat in the second row, hands folded, listening. The auctioneer spoke quickly, as if eager to move past the listing. Decommissioned facility. Equipment included ASR's environmental liabilities disclosed in Appendix C. Opening bid reflects condition. A low number. Lower than the land was worth 10 years ago. No one raised a paddle. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Do I hear? Daniel lifted his card. A few heads turned. The scrapbroker smirked. You know that's not salvage grade, right? Daniel didn't respond. A half-hearted counterbid came from the back. More curiosity than conviction. Daniel raised his card again.com/measured. Final. The gavel fell without drama. A transaction complete. Outside, someone brushed past him and whispered. Desperation move. Daniel signed the papers using the same pen he'd used to authorize multi-million-dollar budgets months earlier. The severance transfer processed that afternoon. Most of it had gone in a single line item. Across the city, Victoria Holly skimmed an internal memo forwarded by legal. Former EVP Daniel Mercer acquires Ridgway facility. She let out a short laugh. He bought scrap metal, she said, sliding the tablet aside. Make sure compliance reviews his non-compete exposure. Marcus Klein nodded. Aggressively. 2 days later, Daniel stood at the chain gates of Ridgway. The security guard, a gray-haired man named Thomas, studied him carefully before unlocking the entrance. You're the new owner. That's what the paperwork says. Inside, the air felt heavier than outside. Dust floated in angled light from cracked skylights. Conveyor belts sagged like tired spines. Panels hung open, wires exposed. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was abandoned. Thomas walked him through the main floor. They shut it down fast. No phased exits. Just gone. Daniel ran his hand along a steel support beam, solid, untouched by rust. The foundation wasn't failing. It had been neglected. It climbed a metal staircase to an overhead catwalk and looked down across the entire facility. From above, the layout shifted. Clear production lanes. Loading docks aligned with rail spur. Dual access points others had called inefficient suddenly appeared flexible. He pulled old logistics maps from a neglected filing cabinet in the corner office. Yellowed paper, hand-drawn modifications. He traced a route with his finger, then another, something most bidders dismissed as poor positioning. He created a triangular distribution corridor between 2 underutilized freight lines. He didn't smile, but his breathing changed that night. He reviewed financing options. The bank officer was polite but firm. Given environmental exposure and lack of operating history under your ownership, we can't extend expansion credit at this time. I understand, Daniel replied. You're welcome to reapply after 12 months of performance data. 12 months felt both immediate and impossibly far. The next weekend brought Lily. She stepped inside, wearing a bright yellow construction helmet that slid down over one eye. Her sneakers echoed loudly against the concrete. It's huge, she whispered. Daniel crouched beside her. The scale pressed in from every direction, acres of uncertainty. She looked up at him. Is this ours? He hesitated. In that pause lived the mortgage notice, the severance balance shrinking, the bank's refusal, Victoria's quiet laughter somewhere across the city. Yes, he said finally. It's ours. She grinned and spun in a slow circle, her laughter bouncing off the empty walls. Daniel stood there, surrounded by rust and possibility, feeling the full weight of what he'd done to everyone else. He had bought what nobody wanted. Now he had to prove it wasn't worthless. The first people Daniel called weren't executives. They were machinists, supervisors, Maintenance leads. Line operators who had spent decades inside facilities that no longer existed. Men and women who knew the difference between a machine that was failing and one that was simply misunderstood. Most had been laid off in waves, replaced by automation strategies that looked impressive in investor decks and fragile in real life. He met them one by one, inside Ridgway's cold main office. No polished presentations, no promises of explosive growth. "I can't offer what you used to make," he told them plainly. "Not yet. But I can offer steady work if we build this carefully." They studied him the way professionals study risk. "You're not planning to flip it?" one asked. "No, then what are you building?" "Something that doesn't break under pressure." It wasn't a slogan. It was a design principle. They started with 12 employees. Daniel walked the floor daily, sleeves rolled, measuring production lanes with chalk and tape. Instead of gutting the old lines, he repositioned them. Modular stations. Flexible output capacity. Smaller batch runs that could pivot quickly. Large corporations chased massive contracts with time. Daniel aimed for the overlooked middle, the specialty components larger firms considered inefficient because the margins were too small. Too small for quarterly glory, not too small for survival. He spent nights recalibrating machines himself, grease on his hands, laptop open beside him. He didn't outsource understanding. He earned it. In a makeshift upstairs office. Lily did her homework at a folding desk. She colored quietly while listening to the rhythmic hum of reactivated motors. "Below, are we rich now?" she asked one evening. He smiled faintly. "No, are we okay?" "Yes." That word mattered more. Across the city, Victoria Halley reviewed a supply performance dashboard. A minor delay indicator blinked yellow. Secondary vendor disruptions, Marcus explained. Some smaller suppliers couldn't scale after the restructuring. Victoria waved it off. Consolidation always creates noise. It settles. But the noise didn't settle. It echoed. 2 weeks later, a mid-level procurement manager flagged another issue. Replacement suppliers demanded longer lead times. Shipping lanes rerouted awkwardly. Victoria's jaw tightened. Then find alternatives. Meanwhile, at Ridgway, the first production cycle completed without fanfare. No ribbon cutting. No press release, just crates loaded carefully onto a rail car at dawn. Daniel tracked every metric manually. Waste percentages, downtime intervals, output stability curves. He adjusted slowly, deliberately. No explosive hiring. No risky expansion. Patience over spectacle. Word traveled quietly through industry-backed channels. Ridgway was operational again. Small runs. Reliable fulfillment. No drama. One afternoon, a sleek black SUV rolled into the cracked parking lot. A private equity representative stepped out in tailored confidence. "We've been monitoring distressed industrial recoveries," she said, walking beside Daniel across the floor. "You've stabilized faster than projected. That was the goal. We'd like to acquire controlling interest, inject capital, scale aggressively. You could exit comfortably." She named a number. Generous on paper. Transformational for a man with an unpaid mortgage notice folded in a drawer. Daniel didn't respond immediately. He watched his team recalibrating. A unit at the far end of the line. No shortcuts. No panic. What would scaling aggressively mean? He asked. Increased output. Expanded labor. Automation upgrades. Strategic debt leverage. And layoffs, if projections miss. She offered a professional smile that didn't answer the question. In the upstairs office, Lily's laughter floated, faintly, down the stairwell. Daniel extended his hand not to accept. "We're not ready," he said. Her smile thinned. "Opportunities don't wait forever, neither do consequences." After she left, Thomas, the security guard, shook his head. "That was real money." Daniel nodded. "It still is. But not at that price." Weeks passed. Ridgway's consistency began attracting attention from mid-tier manufacturers squeezed by unreliable mega-suppliers. Inquiry emails increased. Nothing dramatic. Just steady. One message stood out. A regional contractor tied indirectly to Victoria's largest client requested a capacity evaluation. Not a contract. Just information. Daniel read it twice before replying, "IF secured." It wouldn't make headlines, but it would anchor stability for years. He didn't tell the team yet. He didn't tell Lily. He simply printed the specifications and studied them, long after everyone left. Headquarters. Another yellow warning light blinked on Victoria's dashboard, small fractures spreading across what once looked seamless. She leaned back in her chair. Irritation sharpening. "Review compliance exposure on Mercer's operation," she told Marcus. "If he's cutting corners, I want to know." Pressure was shifting. Ridgway wasn't loud enough to threaten, but it was steady enough to matter. And in corporate ecosystems built on velocity, steadiness can feel like defiance. Victoria didn't notice Ridgway when it restarted. She noticed it when her largest client stopped complaining. A quarterly briefing packet slid across her desk, thinner than usual. Fewer escalation reports, fewer late penalties. A quiet stabilization. In one of the most fragile supply segments. "Who's covering the modular overflow?" she asked without looking up. Marcus Klein adjusted his glasses. "Secondary contracts. Small operators. Names." He hesitated only a fraction of a second. "Ridgeway Manufacturing is listed among them." The room cooled. Victoria leaned back slowly. "He's inside our client chain. Indirectly. Through subcontractors." She tapped the table once. "Controlled reviews non-compete immediately." Within days, Daniel received a certified envelope. Breach notification. Alleged competitive overlap. Threat of injunction. Language dense enough to intimidate even experienced operators. He read it twice at the kitchen table after Lily went to brush her teeth. The wording was aggressive but vague, designed less to win in court than to create hesitation. His phone rang before he could finish outlining a response strategy. "We can escalate," Marcus said smoothly when Daniel answered. "Or we can discuss a resolution." "What kind of resolution?" "Cease operations overlapping whole industrial's core markets. Divest selectively. Avoid unnecessary litigation." "You restructured away from these segments," Daniel replied. "Evenly markets evolve. So do contracts." "A pause of litigation is expensive," Marcus said, "particularly for small facilities." Lily's footsteps pattered down the hallway. Daniel lowered his voice. "Send your formal claims in writing. They already are." After he hung up, Lily stood in the doorway. "Was that about the factory?" He forced a mild expression. "Just paperwork." She studied him longer than most adults would. Later that week, 2 of Ridgeway's smaller suppliers reported receiving calls questioning their association. Subtle pressure. Hints about future partnership eligibility. Nothing illegal. Just strategic. Intimidation. One supplier pulled out. Another delayed renewal. A major capacity evaluation. Email Daniel had been nurturing went silent. He sat alone in the office long after shift end. Acquisition paperwork from the private equity firm reopened. On his desk. The offer still stood slightly reduced now, citing increased regulatory risk. If he signed, the mortgage vanished. And college funds secured. Stability guaranteed. He imagined Lily's future without uncertainty. He imagined her future watching him surrender something he believed in. His pen hovered over the signature line. The house felt unusually quiet that night. Lily appeared beside him holding a small glass jar filled with folded bills and coins. "What's that?" he asked gently. "My rocket fund," she said. "For space camp." He swallowed. "You've been saving that for a year." She nodded, and placed it on the table near the paperwork. "You can use it, for the factor." He stared at the jar. "It makes you different," she continued carefully. "When you talk about it. Different, not stressed, not scared, different. He pushed the acquisition document away. "Lily, I would never take your savings. It's ours," she said simply, echoing her question from the warehouse floor weeks ago. He looked at the signature line one last time, then he tore the document cleanly down the center. The sound was sharper than he expected the next morning. A new notice arrived, this one from a regulatory body. Environmental compliance inspection scheduled. Immediate review. Anonymous complaint filed. Marcus moved faster than Victoria this time. "If he's even slightly out of bounds, we shut him down," he said. Victoria didn't smile. "Make sure it's clean." At Ridgeway, Daniel gathered his team. "We have an audit," he said calmly. "Full cooperation. No shortcuts. No panic." Thomas DeGard exhaled slowly. "You think this is random?" Daniel didn't answer directly. "We've done the work," he said instead. "Now we let the work speak." That night, Lily sat beside him in the quiet office while he reviewed environmental logs and maintenance reports line by line. Not scrambling. Verifying. Outside. The facility lights glowed against the dark industrial skyline, small compared to corporate towers across the city. Bud steady. The audit wasn't just about compliance, it was about survival and somewhere beyond. The paperwork and legal language. A larger client was watching closely, preparing for its own supplier performance audit. Pressure was converging. This time, retreat wasn't an option. The regulators arrived at 8:03 a.m. to Via Cunas. No sirens, no spectacle, just quiet authority. Stepping onto cracked pavement. Inside the facility, conversations softened to murmurs. Machines kept running, but every sound felt amplified. Wrenches tightened slower. Screens were checked twice. Daniel met them at the entrance wearing a simple work jacket. Sleeves already rolled. "Daniel Mercer," he said, offering a steady handshake. The lead inspector, a woman in her late 40s with precise eyes and a weathered clipboard, nodded once. "We'll need full access. Environmental logs, maintenance schedules, disposal records. You'll have them." Marcus Klein stood several feet behind them, hands clasped loosely, observing like a man attending a performance he expected to end badly. The walkthrough began on the production floor. The inspector moved deliberately, running her fingers along filtration units, examining waste containment seals, reviewing digital compliance dashboards. She asked specific questions, 8 intervals, third-party verification reports. Daniel answered without defensiveness. When he didn't know a number by memory, he pulled the record immediately. Workers avoided staring at Marcus, but they felt him there in the loading bay. The inspector paused near a marked storage area. This labeling is 2 days behind update protocol. Daniel glanced at the board. She was right. That's on me, he said. We revised inventory sequence and missed the visual update. She wrote something down. Further down the line, a minor ventilation calibration flagged yellow instead of green. Within tolerance but not ideal. Correctable, she noted. Marcus shifted slightly, as if waiting for something heavier, but nothing heavier came. They moved upstairs to the makeshift compliance office. Stacks of binders sat beside neatly organized digital backups, cross-referenced, time-stamped. You prepared for this? The inspector said, scanning a remediation timeline chart. We prepared for operating, Daniel replied. Inspection just verifies it. She studied him for a moment longer than necessary at headquarters across the city. Victoria was in a separate meeting she hadn't expected. Her flagship plant, recently restructured for efficiency, had failed. An updated environmental compliance threshold introduced quietly 6 months earlier. A filtration system upgrade had been deferred to accelerate quarterly output. Retroactive penalties are significant. Legal informed her how significant. She asked, voice steady but thinner than usual. Public disclosure may be required. By afternoon, industry forums buzzed with cautious speculation. Nothing confirmed. Just whispers about compliance discrepancies at a major industrial player back at Ridgeway. The inspection concluded where it began, at the front entrance. The lead inspector closed her folder. You have minor corrective actions, she said, evenly. Nothing systemic. Documentation is thorough. Operational discipline is consistent. Daniel weighed her. Pending submission of updated labels and recalibrated ventilation logs. You'll receive conditional approval for expanded production classification. Behind him, shoulders loosened almost imperceptibly. Marcus's expression, who didn't change, but something in his posture hardened. Conditional, he repeated carefully. The inspector met his gaze. Standard procedure. After they left, the facility didn't erupt into celebration. There were no cheers, just a quiet exhale. Thomas clapped Daniel once on the shoulder. Guess scrap metal breathes after all. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Upstairs, he reviewed the written notice again. Conditional approval meant capacity increase. It meant eligibility for higher-tier contracts. It meant visibility. His inbox refreshed. A message from the regional contractor reappeared. This time marked urgent. A major client was conducting a long-term supplier evaluation due to instability within existing primary channels. They were expanding their review pool. Ridgeway had been added. Daniel leaned back slowly. Across the skyline, Victoria stared at her own compliance report. Realizing stability was no longer a theoretical advantage, it was leverage. The next move wouldn't be quiet, and this time they would meet across the same table again. The warning came quietly. Victoria's largest client, an industrial manufacturer with global reach and zero tolerance for delay, flagged an escalating disruption risk. 2 consecutive shipment gaps. 1 compliance concern. 1 unresolved vendor dispute. Shutdown modeling had begun in the language of corporations. That meant panic without noise. An emergency call was scheduled. Victoria entered the conference line, prepared to reassure, to reposition, to promise acceleration. Instead, she listened. We are expanding our supplier review pool, the client's operations director said evenly. We require a mid-scale producer capable of rapid modular pivot, fully compliant, immediately scalable. Victoria's jaw tightened. We can stabilize internally. We're aware of your current remediation status. Silence. A list of candidate facilities was circulated for evaluation. Ridgeway Manufacturing appeared third. Daniel received the inquiry through formal channels this time. No backdoor messages. No cautious tone. A direct request for capacity confirmation and, conditional pricing. He read it once, then again. The numbers were larger than anything Ridgeway had handled, but not impossibly so. The modular structure he had built allowed incremental expansion. Without collapse, he gathered his team in the break room. This is not a victory, he said calmly. It's an opportunity. If we pursue it, we do it without compromising how we operate. No cheers, just understanding. 2 days later, a meeting was scheduled. Neutral location, a downtown business conference center, not Victoria's tower. Daniel arrived first. When Victoria entered, she paused only slightly upon seeing him at the far end of the polished table. No hostility, no smile, professional recognition. The client's operations director opened the discussion with blunt clarity. We need assurance, stability, predictable delivery, no legal distractions. Victoria spoke first, outlining her industrials, restructuring, roadmap, compliance, remediation plan, scale advantages. Then Daniel, he didn't oversell, he didn't dramatize, he presented production metrics, audit results, expansion projections, tied to phased hiring rather than speculative automation. Our model prioritizes continuity over speed, he said. We scale by reinforcing what's stable. Victoria leaned back slightly. At limited volume? Initially, Daniel replied. The director looked between them. Can you handle a 40% surge within 90 days? Yes, Daniel, said Victor. Victoria's eyes shifted. With what capital? Daniel met her gaze without challenge. Revenue-backed expansion. Conditional hiring agreements already drafted. No leveraged debt. A subtle dominance tactic surfaced. Holly Industrial can offer integrated ecosystem pricing, Victoria said smoothly. Bundled services. Long-term discounts. Daniel didn't interrupt. When it was his turn, he slid a single-page proposal. Across the table. Fair pricing, multi-year commitment, workforce retention clauses, guaranteeing no abrupt layoffs tied to short-term volatility. Shared compliance transparency. The director scanned it. These protections increase cost. They reduce disruption, Daniel said. Victoria's fingers tapped once against the table. You're proposing stability over optimization, she observed. I'm proposing durability, he answered. The other room quieted. For a moment, the years between them resurfaced: the boardroom dismissal, the quiet laugh about scrap metal, the legal pressure. But none of it entered Daniel's voice. This wasn't personal. It was structural. After an hour of projections and counter-proposals, the director closed his folder. We will diversify primary supply through Ridgeway for the next contract cycle, he said. Holly Industrial will retain partial share pending compliance completion. Not a total displacement, but a shift. A significant one. Victoria nodded. Once controlled documents were prepared, the contract was signed on that. Neutral table, no towering skyline behind either of them as the client's team exited. Only Daniel and Victoria remained briefly in the room. She stood, gathering her portfolio. You moved carefully, she said. Not accusatory, analytical. I moved consistently. Her eyes searched his face, perhaps for resentment, triumph, something sharp. She found none. How did you manage this? She asked finally. Daniel considered the question for half a breath. I didn't cut what was working. The answer wasn't a jab. It was a principle. Victor absorbed it without visible reaction, but something recalibrated behind her composure and acknowledgement. That speed had cost her more than she anticipated. Daniel left the building without lingering. Outside, the city felt unchanged. Traffic moved. People hurried. No headlines yet? He sat in his car for a moment before starting the engine. He didn't call anyone immediately. He didn't announce victory. Instead, he drove back to Ridgeway. The team was waiting without asking. It's secured, he said simply. A ripple of restrained relief moved through the room. No shouting. Just hands shaking hands. Upstairs, he opened his laptop and reviewed expansion timelines once more. Careful adjustments. Phased hiring. Equipment upgrades scheduled within compliance thresholds. No sudden leaps. Durable growth across the city. Victoria returned to her office, overlooking glass and steel. The skyline still reflected power, but it felt less invulnerable. For the first time, Ridgeway wasn't an irritation, it was a factor. And factors reshape empires slowly. The reversal wasn't explosive, it was structural, and that made it permanent. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Victoria stood at the head of the long glass. It wasn't an accusation. By the end of the week, he submitted his resignation, officially citing strategic misalignment. Ridgeway did not celebrate expansion with fireworks. He outlined phased hiring plans and new equipment acquisitions tied strictly to secured revenue. Number 2, which is quiet commitment. The new contract increased output. But Daniel refused to sacrifice the modular flexibility that made Ridgeway resilient. He rejected 2 aggressive partnership proposals that demanded rapid automation in exchange for visibility at home, holding a poster board covered in construction paper and careful handwriting. My dad fixes broken things. The teacher nodded. Daniel, seated in the back, felt something settle in his chest that no contract could replicate. Later that month, scaling in mid-size manufacturing, just operational charts and a small image of the facility at sunrise. Daniel received the issue in the mail and placed it on the kitchen counter without comment across town. Victoria paused when the same article appeared during a financial news segment. The anchor described Ridgeway as a model of disciplined growth in volatile markets. The camera cut briefly to Daniel walking the factory floor beside longtime employees. Victoria muted the television but did not change the channel. There was no bitterness in her expression, only calculation in something quieter. Recognition. She had built empires through velocity. He had built one through endurance. Her phone buzzed with a notification from corporate development, potential acquisition inquiry regarding Ridgeway. She stared at the screen for several seconds. Then she typed back, no, not as revenge, not as strategy, as acceptance. Empires did not always need to absorb what they underestimated. Sometimes they needed to learn from it. In the quiet of her office, With the skyline reflecting back a slightly altered version of power, Victoria allowed herself a private recalibration. Across the city, Daniel locked up Ridgeway at dusk, lights dimming one row at a time. He wasn't thinking about headlines. He was thinking about tomorrow's shift schedule and a promise he had kept. The noise had softened. What remained was steadiness, and that was enough. The renovations were modest, fresh paint in the hallway, a repaired cabinet door that used to hang slightly crooked, the quiet confidence of a home no longer bracing for bad news. The mortgage confirmation letter rested in a drawer that now held nothing urgent. Daniel stood beside Lily's bed as she arranged her school books for the morning. "You forgot the rocket lamp," she said. He reached over and switched it on. Soft light filled the room. She looked smaller at night, less certain than she did during the day. "Are we safe now?" The question wasn't about locks or alarms. Daniel sat on the edge of the mattress. "We always were," he said gently. She searched his face, then nodded, satisfied. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep. Downstairs, Daniel paused in the living room. No financial alerts, no legal notices, just silence that felt earned. An empire isn't measured in market cap, it's measured in what doesn't collapse. Under pressure. At sunrise, Ridgeway's lot filled one vehicle at a time. Workers stepped out carrying thermoses and worn gloves. The overhead lights came on in steady rows. Not dramatic, just reliable. Inside, machines started with controlled rhythm. Months later, Victoria's car slowed briefly as she passed the facility. The sign was cleaner, the structure unchanged. She watched for a moment, then the light turned green. She drove forward. No spectacle, no revenge, just durability.